So we are recording this session, so you'll get a link following the session to pass along to friends, family, whomever couldn't be here tonight. My name is Maria McDougall, and I'm one of the college access counselors. And with me is the fantastic Nikki Bichon, and she's going to be monitoring the chat, the Q&A. So as we're going, feel free to communicate with her that way. I'm going to pause in a few places to see if there's questions or things that would be valuable to be shared with the group, or if I forgot something, Nikki's gonna say like, don't forget to mention that, because we do tackle these things as a team. My hope for you tonight is that you're gonna leave here with some tools and resources to help figure out the financial aid offers process. So at this point, if you're here, you and or your student, it looks like most of you had indicated you are family members, have done the FAFSA. So you did the first most important part, and now you're here because you have aid offers that you need kind of unpacking. And so that's what we're going to do. So if that's not you, that's fine. You're welcome to stay. Just know that the FAFSA is the first step. So we're going to walk through the process today of kind of what to look for, how to compare the aid offers, what the parts are. One of the questions in the registration was like, how do I understand the terminology and one over another and what that looks like? So we're going to go over the parts, and we're going to talk about appealing. So sometimes in this presentation in the past, we focused on like sort of paying the bill, and we have resources about that on our YouTube channel, on our website. But given the context of the pandemic and the fact that your FAFSA looked at 2019 tax information, and 2020 was maybe likely very different income-wise for your ability to pay for college, I want to spend the end talking about, okay, we need more money, things are different, how do we go about that process? So that's how we'll end the evening. If we don't get to everything, if we don't get to all the questions, I did send a PDF of the presentation, so you do have that at your fingertips. And as we go, Nikki's going to put links in the chat for the documents that I'm going to refer to, and any other helpful stuff. I did also send some of those ahead of time, but I'd rather you have it twice than not at all. Okay, so we're going to cover a lot, ask questions as we go. So just how we got here, want to lay the scene for how this works in this part of the process. And I've also indicated here the frequency by which each of these steps happen, right? Because some of them are just once, some of them are repeat, and kind of how this works. So you and or your student and you or your significant other, if you're married, created the FSA ID. That's the gateway into all things financial aid. We hope that you have it written down because you will need it again, because you'll see the second step there is that the FAFSA needs to be completed annually. So this process is going to happen annually. What's beautiful is that usually, unless the student's transferring, this comparison of aid offers is only really going to happen once. You're going to get an aid offer each year, but it's going to be only from the one school, unless the student is transferring. Then the FAFSA data gets sent to the colleges that are on the FAFSA, and then the school reviewed the information and sent an aid offer. Okay, so that happens annually after the FAFSA. So you know, every fall is financial aid season, so remind your students to get that FAFSA done in the fall. They'll get reminders from us if you join our mailing list. They'll get reminders from the FAFSA, from the college, all of that. Right now, we're in the blue box. We are in compare financial aid offers, right? And the comparison, like I said, is really kind of a once thing. It'll just be like a review and understanding in subsequent years at the same institution. And I have a piece there about net price, which is, we're going to drill into that tonight. And then the student is going to complete the requirements in order to receive financial aid. There are some pieces of that are an annual thing. So they have to go on to whatever student portal they have and accept the financial aid and say, yes, I want this. If they're going to borrow the loans, they have pieces related to that. Then the school processes the accepted aid, and they do that by semester, right? So they're going to get billed by semester, and the aid is going to pay out by semester. If there are any documents missing or any follow-up, there's communications from the financial aid office. And then usually the aid will disperse to the bill no earlier than 10 days before the first day of classes. That's the earliest that aid can disperse. So you might see on a bill that gets sent pending or estimated financial aid, and that's just them telling you like we know they're getting it, but they hasn't paid out yet when you're trying to figure out that bottom line bill. Okay, so that's kind of how that's a quick and dirty of how the financial aid process works. Okay, so we're going to focus today on kind of that blue box, like understanding all of those financial aid offers, what's on it, how do we look at those, what do we need to know to get to the bottom line to figure out what this bill situation is going to be. Couple of things, don't forget to file the FAFSA. Again, most of you, hopefully you're all here, you've done that, we've checked that off our list. Only students that are accepted for admission can receive a financial aid offer. So I'm guessing you're here, you probably have at least one, maybe there's a couple floating around. Then there might be schools that you've applied to that you're waiting to hear about. And that's because they have to be accepted for admission first, and then the financial aid offer follows that. File the FAFSA as soon as possible, but always before May 1st, and that's true for returning students as well. We want to make sure that you're meeting any possible deadlines, and the May 1st one in particular is important for students attending a Maine school who are eligible for the Maine State Grant. And we can help you for feeling stuck. So we have FAFSA help available every year. We did it all virtual this year, which is a huge accomplishment. But that's not just for first-time students. So if you've got returning, or you've been to an event and then you've got an older child that's coming through, or a younger child that's coming through, we are here to help you with that process no matter what. So I just like to put that out there. So you do the FAFSA, we're in the financial aid offers territory. What is it? What are you looking at here? So it might be a paper document. Some schools will send out like the very first offer of financial aid in a paper letter, but usually just one time. Everything after that, any updates, definitely as a returning student, you're looking at an electronic notification, usually an email that says go view the aid offer on the student portal. Again, that will be received after the student has been offered admission, and there's usually probably a couple weeks or so, maybe a little longer, depending on how early they get accepted, gap in between finding out the big envelope, congratulations, you're in, and the financial aid offer. The aid offer provides a breakdown of the types and amounts of financial aid offer. So it's like, here's what you qualified for federally, statewide, institutionally, and how much, right? So, and that's about as bare bones as it gets, right? And we're going to see as we go through the presentation that no two aid offers are identical, which is part of the trouble. We're going to help you figure out how to break them down. This is how schools determine what is going to be on that aid letter. Okay, so they use this formula. This is like the formula itself is standard. How they meet it is what is changed, right? So they take the cost of attendance, and that's direct things like your tuition and fees, room and board, anything that's like mandatory that's going to show up on the bill. And indirect things like books and supplies, usually a category for like miscellaneous educationally related expenses and travel, and those things that make up the bigger college cost of attendance. So they take that figure and they subtract out that expected family contribution. You'll recall that's the number from the FAFSA. That's kind of your, it's similar to like a credit score. It's a measure of your family's financial strength, ability to pay for college, right? So they take that figure. You'll note if you look at your student aid report, it doesn't have a dollar sign in front of it, right? It's not a dollar amount, it's like a benchmark, okay? So they take the cost of attendance, they subtract the EFC. What's left is the need, right? And that's kind of the thing that, okay, and then there's a ratio of like how much of that need can each college meet? And that's what we're trying to figure out. And because costs vary, so your cost of attendance is all over the map depending on what the school is, the need is also going to vary. Your EFC, I don't know why that flipped. I didn't touch a button. Your EFC is constant. So your EFC is what it is from the FAFSA. It will not change. So that middle number is always going to kind of be the same. Okay, so if you're getting offers from the school and it does say what your EFC is and it's different on 2-8 offers, let us know. We have to do a little digging on that one. Okay. So how they fill this need, right, what they've spit out that determination for, it's going to be a combination of different things: federal, state aid, and institutional sources, okay? And there's often a gap between a student's need and the financial aid offer. Now, I want to pause a second here because I do want to note that sometimes through the admissions process, students are offered merit, okay? So that's money that's coming right off the top. It's from admissions. it's largely like academics based. If it's Division I athletics, it might be athletics based, those kinds of things. What we're talking about is the need-based financial aid that's determined from the FAFSA. Okay, so they're two separate buckets, right? So just bear that in mind as we're going forward. So when schools are filling this need, there is often a gap between how much need there is and how much financial aid is offered. Okay, and we have strategies and we have resources and videos about sort of meeting that gap, right? But let's talk through the types of aid that you might see that are going to help meet that need. So gift aid is the free money. That's the golden ticket. That's the stuff you want. It does not have to be repaid. Therefore, it is a gift, right? Grants and scholarships, and those are both from federal, state. Those are all those awesome private scholarships that I know your seniors are looking at right now and doing a deep dive into applying for. So that all counts as gift aid. Then there's federal direct loans, which are student loans in the student's name, and they're almost always on every financial aid offer because by virtue of filing the FAFSA, a student is eligible for a federal direct loan. They do not have to borrow the loan, but they are eligible for it. There are other types of private loans. We can dive into that in a little bit. Then there's work study if the student is eligible and if they indicated on their FAFSA that they would be interested in work study. This is money that's available to be earned on campus while working. The challenge, and you're going to see this when we break down some of the aid offers, is that it's often lumped in with the financial aid offer, but it does not come off the bill. So it is not money that's going to come off that bottom line, how much do we owe? It's a great way for students to work on campus and have a little pocket money for books or supplies or Chinese food and shoes. Guilty, right? That college experience money. That's a great way for students to work on campus and learn the campus. Sometimes it leads to a big girl job. That's how I landed in financial aid, was that I was a work study student in the financial aid office, and then I blinked and 15 years went by. But those are kind of the types of aid that you're going to see categorically on a financial aid letter. How and when will this arrive? So I'm assuming you're here tonight because you've got at least one or you're itching to get a couple soon, right? Again, we talked about paper, maybe once via snail mail. The rest are usually email, and this is a good reminder to have your students get used to checking their university email address. Okay, so financial aid offices, the college, they're going to mostly send things to that .edu email address, and that's for security reasons. So if you've got a student who's not great at checking email, maybe suggest that they forward to a personal or that they build the habit of checking that university email, especially after they've made the decision, right? That this is where I'm going. They don't want to miss any of those communications. Financial aid offices are working to get aid offers out as soon as possible. We had a few, I heard of a few that were coming out in even like late December and early January. So folks are really trying to ramp up getting aid offers out. So I hope that you're here with us tonight with at least one in hand to kind of follow along as we go, right? But that's kind of how that process works. When there are returning students, so once they're in their second, third, fourth year, it's usually later. So they're looking at an email notification, March, April-ish, give or take. So just keep that in mind that it's going to be a little bit later when they're a returning student. So here's the challenge, okay? And this is a challenge nationally, not just in Maine. And so I put this out here, and we did a session for counselors and financial aid people were on there. And I do point this out, and it's a little bit of a sticking point, but there are lots of areas in which a financial aid letter can be misunderstood. And some of that has to do with terminology and understanding of the components. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're not standardized. So we have schools, 7 University Maine System campuses, and they each have a different paper letter, right? Even though they all operate in the same student system, right? So I just kind of point this out to say that you're not alone if you're feeling confused by this process, right? That there are many, many families. This was a survey that Navient did, that 67% of them said that they received the letter from the school, but that 43% of those thought at least one component was difficult to understand. So almost half, right? So this is not an easy process without some kind of general overview guidance, which is why we are here this evening. So think of it like this. They're all going to have similar components, but they're apples, oranges, and apricots, right? They're round fruits, but they all look a little different. Okay, so we're going to look at kind of what those differences are, what to look for, and then we'll talk about kind of, okay, since they're all different, how do we kind of equalize them and do the math? So here's what might be included. So variations of these you will see as we move forward, but it's generally going to have the types of aid. They might list the cost of attendance. We hope they do so that you can kind of see how they got to that determination. It might show the assumptions used, and what we mean by that is it might assume the student is full-time, so it'll say this, we've put this package together based on the assumption that the student will be a full-time on-campus resident, right? So they're gonna, some of them will say, here's how we got here, okay? They might include a calculation to determine true cost. Some do this better than others. We're gonna see some examples. It might also include other funding options, notices, next steps, important things to know, depending on how much space they have. Or there might be an insert with the financial aid offer, so just keep those things in mind. Let's look at a couple of examples. We've created some fictional / nerdy colleges to run this down for you, but these are based on real financial aid letters, okay? So you're gonna see that these are potential breakdowns of what you might see. So we're gonna look at this example where is personally one of my favorites because of the way it breaks it down, right? So you'll see the aid is broken down by those categories we talked about in the beginning: gift aid, work study, loans. Okay, so you'll see that they listed that free money and they said it, free money, right at the top. So you know, this is all grants and scholarships that you got that does not have to be repaid. And you can say, yeah, look at all that. They separated out work study and they indicated earned paycheck, which is good, so that it's a reminder like, oh, this is something I was offered, but it's not coming off that bill. They separated out the federal loans and indicated that they must be repaid. And then on this one, they did indicate the costs, both direct and indirect. They indicated the assumptions and kind of what you'd be looking at for an estimated bill, assuming you took the federal loans, right? So this one is like sort of peak in terms of information provided. Then we're going to look at this one, which is a similar breakdown, and I like it because it kind of takes the work study piece one step further. So you're going to see that, again, they've broken it down by grants and scholarships, so that free money. They've separated out the loans, and then they put work study at the bottom intentionally and said not to be applied to student account, right? So they've made it abundantly clear that while this is something that is offered via the financial aid process, it's not something that's going to come off the bill. This one also includes a bunch of other things. Like if you look to the right, you'll see other financing options there. So they talk about their payment plans. They talk about military benefits for people that are eligible, private student loans, all of those things. So they're letting you know that there's other options available, right? So just, you know, and they've got their little asterisks. Information's about your award. Work study is not credited to your student account, right? These are important things you need to know. So you'll notice that those two similar, but still look different. Let's look at a third example. And many, I will say, fall into this category, right? Nikki and I are both former financial aid office people and can speak to, we've seen the construction of these, right? And some of them, the schools have been doing it the same way forever, right? This one is not as broken down by type of aid. So you'll see everything's kind of listed, lumped together. And if you know that the word grant means it's gift aid, you would know that doesn't have to be repaid, but that assumes that you know that, right? So you'll see the grants there, you'll see the loans, you'll see campus work study, right? But nothing there really indicates what needs to be repaid, what doesn't, the fact that work study is not coming off that bill. So I know I've sat with families in the past and gone through and they subtract out that work study total and I have to go, oh, nope, that doesn't come off the bill unless you make arrangements separately with the student accounts office to say, I'm going to take my work study paycheck and pay you every week for tuition, which can happen, but it's not automatically going to do that. Okay, so just these are three, we took real examples, we slapped some fictional stuff on them, but these are 3 examples of financial aid offers that you might see. So you might be looking at some of yours and going, oh, some of these are in the middle. Mine's a lot like this one. Mine's a lot like the other one. But we just wanted you to see that there's quite a lot of variation in some of these. So you've got fruit, you've got a fruit basket of financial aid offers, right? How do we figure out that bottom line? Because I know you're all here to be like, what the heck do I do with this information? How do I drill down into knowing what that bill is going to be and what I'm going to do about it? Right, so let's take a look at how we do that. Nikki's going to go ahead and put a link in the chat to our tool to help you do this. So we have a worksheet that's for comparing costs and financial aid offers. And what I love about this is that it will do the math for you. So you can line up 3, you could, and then, you know, if you have more than 3, you can add another sheet. But you can line them up side by side and do the math. So it's a little blurry on the screen, but if you open the link, you'll see you put in your direct costs. So that tuition, mandatory fees, room and board, and you get your direct billable costs. Then you subtract out that free aid. So you're going to know, right, clear as day, before any borrowing, what that bottom line is. Then you can say, okay, we are going to take those federal loans. We're going to subtract those out. And then where do we land, right? So this is a great tool. I don't really like math, even though I work in financial aid. So I dig that it does the math for me, but maybe you're an Excel person. I just worked with a mom who, like, they had a whole Excel and they built in the formula and they created this on their own, and I am not worthy. There's lots of different tools to do this, okay? I don't necessarily care how you line this up. Maybe you write it all out by hand. You know, you might want to print this out and hand write it. That's fine. But I do want you to do it, because just because it has more stuff on it doesn't necessarily mean it's the better deal. Just because you got a great merit offer from a school doesn't necessarily mean that's the best deal financially when you break down all the numbers. So you're not going to be able to tell just by looking at a financial aid offer if you got the best deal for you or what that bottom line financial aid is. Okay. So you'll see here we lined up those aid offers from the school. So we have clear as day numbers, right? And we've drilled into, you know, that direct cost minus the grants and scholarships is that net price. That's the, like, what we're paying out of pocket, right? And that's what you want to keep track of. I'm going to pause here and see if there are questions or things Nikki wants to add or what's going on in the chat.
Great question in the chat. If first-year students get a fixed amount of direct loans, I just wanted to mention that dependent students, and then when I mean dependent students, these are people that had to put parent information on the FAFSA. Dependent students do get $5,500 as freshmen, but then it goes up $1,000 for sophomores and then juniors and seniors. So that amount goes up, but also as another like mix into this, if a parent is denied for a Parent Plus loan, the student can get $4,000 more a year in their unsubsidized loan. So that's most people get $5,500, but there could be some switches up there. So,
and that's great. I'm glad that came up because, you know, it does increase a little bit, and that's sort of the government's way of investing in the student's education, right, and providing more. And, you know, tuition and fees costs tend to go up, but you might find that your student moves off campus, right, and as a sophomore, junior, or senior, and so they're not paying for that room and board. So there's lots of trade-offs there, but great question. That there are limitations to that, but it does increase as the grade level goes on. Anything else in there, Nick, we want to highlight? Okay. There are other things I also want you to consider when you're thinking about this process. So is any of the aid renewable? So any of those scholarships, and particularly with things like private scholarships that your students are applying for, find out if they have to reapply, if they have to provide documentation of grades or things like that. You know, consider what's renewable. Merit aid that's based on academics usually has a GPA requirement, right? They have to keep a full-time student status. They have to keep up their GPA. So make sure you're aware of all of those requirements. Keep in mind that costs increase each year. I just worked with a mom who the student's going to Farmington, which is where I went. So naturally we had a grand old time talking about financial aid. But we had a conversation about, okay, get the plan. We went through that worksheet together and we talked about get the plan in place for the first year, but then consider how you're going to maintain that plan or adjust that plan for subsequent years, right? So multiply 2, 3, 4 times depending on the length of the program. Considering that costs may increase. And sometimes you might hear a college say, we've frozen tuition, but guess what? Maybe they might raise the price on to offset, right? Room and board. So consider those things when you're talking about, okay, this is where our bottom line is and what as a family can we afford for a payment plan or co-sign on for a loan, consider if you can maintain that plan for multiple years and how you might boost savings or how you might try to find other scholarships to reduce costs in the future. So when you're looking at this, consider doing the math for the entirety of the education, especially where borrowing is concerned. So it's a little bit less of a shock at the end of the game. Other things to think about. I want to spend a couple minutes talking about scholarships. One of my favorite things to do is myth busting. And somewhere along the line, there was this assumption that if you got a lot of scholarships, you lost financial aid, right? And there are certainly circumstances where sometimes things have to be switched or flipped or moved around. But generally, as I mentioned at the beginning, families usually have a gap in how much need is covered by the financial aid. So scholarships are always going to try to fill that unmet need first. If there's no unmet need, so everything's met, the financial aid office is going to do everything they can. So they might increase the room and board to the actual price you're paying because they usually do an estimate. They're going to try to build in cost to boost that cost of attendance to add more needs so that there's no impact on the financial aid negatively. Sometimes it might mean switching a little bit of subsidized loan to an unsubsidized loan, which is a bummer, but not necessarily going to impact the bottom line of the bill, right? So these are just things I want you to keep in mind as you're considering the scholarship search. I'm never going to tell a family not to look for scholarships. The impact on aid is minimal. The same is true for college savings. I'm going to throw that out there. People say, if you have money saved for college, you lose financial aid. Also not true for a multitude of reasons. And anything that's a free dollar, a scholarship, college savings, the cash you shoved in the mattress, is one less dollar that you have to borrow and repay with interest. Okay, so ramp up. Now's the time to get on them and say, and March, April, May, particularly in senior year, is when a lot of these become due. A lot of those private scholarship apps are like happening now. Also remind your returning students to do the scholarship app that's general for their college, because that's a recurring thing. So if there are questions about scholarships, I want to pause for a second. I want to make sure that that myth has been busted, and to consider also that if you got a scholarship from your college or from your high school rather, so your student at the senior assembly gets a scholarship, to report that to the financial aid office, but to not fret that there's going to be a huge impact. And also to consider, having students continue to look through the summer and continue the process. So every year they have to do the FAFSA. I want them to do scholarships every year as well.
So no questions. I just want to mention in the chat, I did put a link to the MES scholarship, which is a great scholarship for Mainers. But also I just wanted to mention that I've worked in a financial aid office for 18 years, and I rarely saw someone who got outside scholarships that made them lose any other type of aid. When it did happen, because that is a federal regulation, and you can't have more need-based aid than you have need. What we did is we took away work study or removed some loans. So if anyone ever says I'm not going to apply for scholarships because it's going to mess with other stuff, it's having too much money is never like that's so rare. So I just want to make sure that people do apply. And I just did get a question that someone didn't see any of the links in the chat. So if you had joined a little bit later, that was a little bit earlier, I'll put that back in the chat again. So awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think it's just one of those things that it happened to one student and word of mouth, or a few students, and consider that students might get offered work study, but they might not work on campus. They might not utilize all that money. So also, when I was in a financial aid office, we did the same thing. I'd say, I got to reduce this by $500. Are you using your work study money? And they might go, no. And I go, oh, good. Then I can make the numbers work, right? So consider that they're going to do that. They're going to do what they can to make it fit if it doesn't fit. And I want you to look for scholarships, and I want you to take out of your brain that that's going to have a negative impact. And if you get a Pell Grant, that's not going anywhere. You're going to get that regardless. So in no universe is anyone going to reduce that or anything like that from your financial aid for the reason alone of you got some additional scholarships. So I'm put that soapbox away for now. A couple other things I want you to think about. How long is the program? So how long is that student going to be in school? Is that plan feasible? We talked about. Keep in mind that every $10,000 borrowed translates to a payment of about $100 a month for 10 years, give or take, right? So just if you do borrow, and that's a reality for most families, okay? I am a person with 2 degrees. I have a lot of student loan debt, right? A lot of people have to borrow to help meet that cost. That's fine. Consider salary versus debt. So we have on our website a salary versus debt calculator. So if the student does a little research and they figure out what their starting salary might be, they can plug in some information and figure out, okay, you probably don't want to borrow more than this because you're not really going to be able to repay that based on that starting salary. And what's great now is, especially within our community college system and our university main system, they're doing fantastic things to let students know where they're at with borrowing throughout their education. So as long as the student is paying attention, they're going to know how much they borrowed each year, and how they can manage that and who they can contact to help resolve that. So there's lots of work being done to make debt manageable and less of a sticker shock when you get done. Are there living options that can keep costs down? Here's an insider tip. Room and board is always the most expensive part of the process. Public, private, in-state, out-of-state, doesn't matter. You're almost always paying more for room and board than you would be if you were just paying for tuition fees. So if you've got a student who wants to go to a college that's within driving distance, consider commuting from home. And I know some parents and students go, oh, no, get out, right? I want to leave, and that's fine. And we certainly value the campus experience, although the pandemic has really shifted some of that, and students were kind of forced to live at home or live off campus without choice. But in a non-pandemic situation, it can be, if affordability is really the primary driving factor in the choice, consider if there's an option within commuting distance that can really cut down on some of those costs. I would also add here, getting the basics done at a community college, right? Math, English, all of those that are very affordable, especially utilizing financial aid that's need-based, and then transferring in someplace else, right? For that, to finish off that 4-year degree. So just consider those different options as you're trying to make the choice about where the student's going to go. That's all in a things are as they are circumstance. But you probably did the FAFSA already. Maybe you even did it in October last year. It used 2019 taxes. 2020 happened, pandemic, all hell broke loose. Things might be different, right? And that's the case for many families. So I want to spend the rest of our time together talking about what to do in that circumstance, but I just want to make sure we're clear of any questions or anything related to what's going on when circumstances are as they are. Nikki, anything you want to shout here?
Sorry, I was just reading the one of the questions that came in about the Pell Grant.
Oh.
What are the requirements, or how do you apply through the college based on income? So yeah, the Pell Grant is when you do the FAFSA, you're automatically applying for the Pell Grant, which is a federal grant. The FAFSA applies you for a bunch of different aid programs, and the Pell Grant is one of those things. And it is based on financial need. But as Maria was starting to talk about, if for some reason your family circumstances have changed, as many people's have this past year, so many people have lost their jobs. The FAFSA has 2019 income information, and think about what 2020 was like. So as you're going to talk about appealing, that might later make you eligible for a Pell Grant if you weren't originally. So just something to think about. Go ahead, Maria.
No, that's a great question. And and not the first time I've heard it, especially this year, interestingly enough. And so I think, the FAFSA is your way of indicating, I am interested in receiving financial aid to help me pay for college. And it puts you in the running based on eligibility for federal things like Pell Grant, Supplemental Education Opportunity, which is a kind of grant from the feds for Pell eligible students, the Main State Grant if you're attending a Maine institution, and then federal loans. And then everything else is going to come from the college specifically if they have their own institutional dollars. Okay, so and that's all by way of doing the FAFSA. If there's another kind of application or another particular fund, the college will let you know how to apply for that. Okay. So let's dive into this appeals piece here. And I'm going to use, there's some vocabulary here. I promise there's no quiz, but I kind of want to run down terms you might hear as part of this process. And as we talked about, Nikki and I are both former financial aid office people and have been on the other side of this equation, so we can give you some tips in terms of how this is going to work. I'm going to use appeal kind of broadly through the end of this presentation. You might hear this process or the decision related to this process as professional judgment, which is basically the language that financial aid offices are provided from the federal government to indicate that they are using their professional judgment to make an exception to a rule, right? So where the FAFSA is the rule, the appeal is something's different, we need to rework it, okay? Some schools call this process special circumstances. Although this is more commonly related to like the change in dependency, so moving from needing parent information to not needing parent information. But sometimes a school might have a form related to the appeal and they might call it a special circumstances form, right? Something beyond what's on the FAFSA. And I will say that this has been ramped up because of the pandemic, but this is not only an option you have during this time, right? So you can appeal, let's fast forward 2 years from now and we're all beyond the pandemic and everything's like it used to be, kind of, and something changes with your family's ability to pay that's not related to the pandemic, but a job loss or a divorce or something like that, this stuff still all applies. So I just want to make that clear that this is not just specific to the pandemic that we're all living through. This is applicable to any time something has changed versus what was on the FAFSA. So I just want to make sure that's clear. So here's the process generally, and it is kind of school specific in that sometimes they might have a form that they want you to do that's specific to them because of how they're going to look at certain things. Generally, you want to write a letter. Even if they have a school specific form, you want some kind of letter that's going to supplement and paint the picture, right? And anything that's submitted to the financial aid office is going to stay in the financial aid office. It's going to just become part of the student's record. No one's going to see it except that financial aid counselor. Okay, so the student should author a statement. This is where I'm at. My dad lost his job because of the pandemic. We're going to talk about some language in a minute. If crafting that letter feels tough, difficult, where do I start? How do I do that? Nikki's going to put a link in the chat for a site called Swift Student, which is a cool thing that we kind of recently found out about that will kind of build that skeleton letter for you. So you can put in some information that's going to craft a letter that you can then download and send on that can help you explain your circumstances. And it's free to use, which we love. Again, I would put the paperwork together, write that letter, write that statement. Don't be too long-winded. So about a page or so is good. The financial aid office is going to, especially this year, going to get a ton of these. So brevity is key, but enough that you're going to explain the circumstances and here's what's going on. We want the student to initiate this process. However, it's likely that the parent's information is what's changed. So sometimes the parent's going to take the lead on this, and that's fine. I would still recommend putting the letter from the perspective of the student. My parent, this is what happened in my household. Just because it is their process, they are taking ownership of it, knowing that the parent's going to have some say in what's going on. When you're crafting this appeal letter, summarize the situation and the impact on the family. So-and-so lost a job. We're now down to one income. So-and-so, we got divorced. This is what happened. Make sure to emphasize that what happened was beyond the family's control. So it wasn't just somebody quit because they got mad and, that's a choice. And as much as that does have an impact, the financial aid office is going to say, you kind of decided to do that. We can't do anything about that, right? So make sure to say, like, we did not choose to leave this thing. We did not choose, it was beyond family's control. And then supply supplemental documentation. So us financial aid people, lived and died by document, right? Provide evidence of what happened. Because you think about it, you're making an exception to a federal rule. So that financial aid office is going to say, this is what we want to do, and here's the documentation that backs that up. This might be a letter from a third party that's close to the situation. It might be a separation, the letter that you no longer have a job. It might be the final pay stub. It might be some kind of evidence to the financial change in circumstances. Okay, so make a copy. Don't send an original. Make copies of everything and include that in your appeals information. Make sure to have contact information. Make sure to put like the student's name and student ID numbers on these things, particularly if you're a family where there are multiple last names. Things like that, those little things that can delay the processing of these. Make sure they know how to contact the student and you. And again, brevity is key, concise, clear. Don't go beyond 2 pages. I'd say don't go beyond a page. Really put it all out there, the who, what, when, where, why in the beginning, because there's actual humans reading these letters. So here's an example just to kind of get you a sense of what this might look like. So I lost my job on 3/20/2020 when my place of business permanently closed, or I was furloughed when my place of business closed, but I might return in the summer. Indicate whether it seems temporary or permanent, include that documentation from the employer, and then show documentation of income. So, and a lot of times with an appeal, the financial aid office will ask for this anyway. So they're going to want to see that 2018 tax return. They're going to want to maybe look at pay stubs. They're going to, if you've done the 2020 taxes, they might say we want to see both side by side. We want to see current and prior proof of income so that they can really do that calculation and make sure that they're putting everything as accurate as possible. And then predict, as best you can what the rest of the year looks like. And consider this also that, so we're in, we did our FAFSA, we used 2019 income, 2020 happened, it's now 2021, they're walking in the door, fall of 2021, even when the pandemic is over, it's not like the impact will stop, right? So make sure to consider, like, here's this long lasting effect that we've had. It's really difficult to find another job or those kinds of things. Now, there'll be a new FAFSA cycle. And what's interesting about that is that's going to look at 2020 taxes, right? The next FAFSA cycle. So that's going to be a year where maybe people get a little more money because 2020 wasn't a great year. But sort of think ahead a little bit in terms of what's, has been an ongoing problem, or I just got a job in March of 2021, but we drained all of our savings for X, Y, and Z. Paint that picture, okay? Questions in the chat? I saw some flashes, so I just want to make sure everyone's kind of following along.
There was a great question saying there are 2 phases to financial aid. And so I would say, yes, that merit scholarships are usually given out when the student's in the admissions process. And then once the student is accepted, the financial aid office looks at the FAFSA and they award need-based aid. So yeah, I would consider that as 2 phases of financial aid. So that did make sense. And if my answer I typed in didn't make sense, let me know and we can figure that out. And also, second great question, do you still pay room and board if you commute from home? You don't. But the school does realize that you still have to pay to eat. So when you see a cost of attendance, it's really that they're just calculating, it does cost you something to eat while you're in college. So that's why they do include it in the cost of attendance. You just won't be billed for it because you're already paying for it to live at home.
That's a great question. And to speak to the merit thing, there's also people to go through the appeals process of trying to get more merit aid. And that's different from what we're talking about here. So if when you get that initial letter from admissions and they say, congratulations, you've been awarded it's got a flowery name, presidential scholarship, right? For $15,000. Sometimes that's referred to as like the discount rate. So like what's coming right off the top, wham, bam, before any financial aid. Okay, and that is a negotiable thing sometimes. It's certainly okay to talk to the admissions office and say, Susie wants to retake the SAT. Can we sweeten the pot? Or here's what happened. Or I'm going to look at this school versus this school. They gave me more merit. That's a negotiable piece in that way. This is specifically related to the FAFSA stuff, the need-based financial aid, where they've really drilled into looking at that income to see what you were previously eligible for. Can there be any adjustments based on a change in income going down? Now, if your income went up, some of our essential workers like grocery store workers getting hazard pay and those kinds of things. Some people had an increase in income. Don't report that. You don't have to let them know your money went up. That will get counted around the next FAFSA cycle, right? But if there was something where income went down, or you went from 2 to 1 income or something like that, that's this kind of appeal. I want to review my financial aid to see if I qualify for anything additional, because now I make less money, as essential. So I just wanted to make that distinction with those two types of appeals. We're nothing if not people that are going to provide you with checklists and tools to help you through this process. I just did a presentation yesterday for some seniors in their class, and I was like, and here's another checklist, and here's another checklist, and here's another, but we want to make this process as easy as possible for you. So Nikki's going to throw into the chat our kind of steps for appealing, which goes even more in depth than what I've just provided to you, with a little like, don't forget this, don't forget that, make sure to include this, to just give you some tips and tricks for a successful appeal. And as I said, financial aid offices are expecting to receive these en masse for the current, for the current financial aid cycle that we're in. So don't hesitate. It cannot hurt to ask. You might be surprised at the eligibility that you didn't know you had because of these financial circumstances. And again, anything you submit as part of this process is going to stay in the financial aid office. Keep that in mind, that, it's a little icky to have to write about these experiences, but if there are any silver linings, it might mean a little bit more financial aid. That was a lot, but I want to leave you with some closing thoughts. It really is important to compare financial aid offers and to do the math. And even if you're like, we decided this is where we're going, do the math anyway. So the mom I met with, where they had decided she was going to Farmington, the mom had gone too, they already knew. But I said, let's run through this worksheet. Let's do the numbers anyway, just so that you have in front of you what that billable line is going to look like. So I do encourage you to do that. We can help you. So in addition to this session, where you've got a lot of information, we actually are going to do a workshop via Zoom virtually, where you can sign up for a time to meet one-on-one with myself, Nikki, Jess, one of our college access folks, to break it down. So we'll go through that comparing cost worksheet with you. We'll send it to you when we're done, that we can help you navigate through this math. And then we can also in that meeting talk about paying that bottom line. So once you've got that number, what is it? Okay, now what? Now what do we do, right? When we have resources for that on our website, but certainly we can help you through that at that appointment. So she's going to put in the chat for how to register for that. If none of those times work for you on that particular session, reach out to us. We can schedule a time to work with you at any point for free virtually. Students might ask, counselors or coaches or somebody to contribute a letter of support for the appeal. So if you know that you've got a third party to reach out to, make sure that you do that in a timely manner and give them time to craft that support documentation, all of that. And I'll leave you with this: when in doubt, call the financial aid office. They are there to help. They're going to be extremely busy. I might also say email, because then everything's in writing, right? I like to have the documentation to refer back to, but just ask. We need to appeal. Do you have a specific form? Is this the piece of documentation to support that you might be looking for? They are there to help you. They do want to help you navigate through this process. You can certainly always contact us and we can help you navigate that conversation, or help you understand something that the college has sent to you. But when in doubt, ask them. They are the experts at their own institutions and they know what to look for. That was a lot. I hope it didn't feel like drinking water through a fire hose. But I hope that you will, if you've got, you've got tools at your disposal to do this. If you still feel like you want a Sherpa to guide you through that, let us help you with that. Sign up for the workshop session, or Nikki's going to throw both of our email addresses in the chat, so that you can reach out to us if one of those sessions on the 29th doesn't work for you. If you or someone you know still needs FAFSA help, next week we are offering FAFSA week, where you can also sign up for a one-on-one appointment to get the FAFSA done. So we've got a lot of resources available to you. Again, on social media, we have a couple of videos on our YouTube channel about paying the bill. So I know we didn't talk too much about that tonight. I wanted to leave you a little extra time. I was hoping not to take the full hour. So if you have questions, I'm going to hang out, of course, if you want to ask some of those questions. But we do have a couple of videos and actually a recorded presentation about how do I pay the bill, right? What happens once I've decided and July comes and it's billing season. Okay, so check out those resources. And I'm gonna hang for a second and we're gonna do questions.
So I did get a question on looking at that financial aid offer. You might see the merit scholarship listed that admissions maybe already told you about. So that might be on there, but it's not always super obvious what the other need-based scholarships and grants are. So anytime I see scholarship or grant, I usually take my highlighter, no joke, I've got 85,000 of these, and I highlight scholarships and grants because I want to know that's a free money. I don't have to repay it. Then I go to the school's website and I look at how did I get it and how do I keep it? So that's where I'll probably see why they gave it to me. So I'll be able to see if it was a need-based, maybe. I mean, sometimes the description is not great. So that might be a conversation with financial aid to see if it was a need-based scholarship. It's a great idea for anyone to take that financial aid offer and maybe talk to financial aid and say, all right, all these different things that I got, how did I get them and how do I keep them? Because when I worked in financial aid, we gave out scholarships for people in certain majors, right? And then if someone switched majors, you might lose that money. So it's always good to know, was this need-based or did I get it because I'm in the welding program? So I always like to know, how did I get that money?
Great points.
I hope that answered that question. If not, just send me a chat or let me know. But secondly, I did, oh, that's good. That was helpful. Thank you. I did mention, I did put in links to our workshops that are coming up. And I wanted to mention, because we always ask do we have to pay for this? And I just want to make sure we are a free resource to you. We're not trying to sell you anything. We are not, we're a free resource for Maynard. So feel free to join us and realize that we're just financial aid geeks. We love this stuff. So feel free to come register or email us or call us in any way. We're here to help.
And it's any school too. Nikki and I both worked at various places. And one of the things I didn't like about it was that I didn't get to help students figure out the best option for them. And that's what we get to do here. So bring all your aid letters, community college, public, private, any of that. We're going to go through the math and figure out financially what the bottom line is. And then, we really want to go to this one. It's a little bit of a stretch. We can help you figure out kind of what a plan might look like for that. So we're Switzerland. We're neutral. We want to help you get to wherever you want to be. So we will conclude for this evening, but we'll hang out to have any last minute questions. Again, please send us an email, join us for the workshop session, and thank you for joining us tonight.
One more quick question. After getting merit aid and want to ask for more, even with no changes to the FAFSA, how do you go about asking more? Say it's the first choice and I was just having the same conversation just before I got to this webinar. It's schools are very used to being called to say, listen, this is my first choice. I'd really love to go here. Is there any other aid I can apply for? If there isn't, they'll tell you, and that's okay. But if you didn't ask, you don't know. So don't ever feel weird about calling. And I can tell you, I never really enjoyed it when someone said, well, this school offered me way more money. And I'd say, okay, well, send me the numbers. And often my school was cheaper because even though you didn't get a giant scholarship, our school costs less. So I don't recommend people saying, this school gave me all kinds of money. I usually just say, listen, this is my first choice. I really want to make this happen. Is there any other aid I can apply for? Also, merit money is often based on high school grades. They're moving away from SAT scores because of the pandemic. They weren't able to take them, whatever the case may be. If grades have gone up, or if there's a chance before school ends to do extra credit, retake tests, whatever it is, they might reconsider you for more merit aid because your grades did increase. So yeah, it's always worth a conversation. I totally think so. Anything to add to that, Maria, before I move on to another question?
Yeah, I just noticed a couple that popped in. These are great. And this one in particular, a person asked, we had an aid offer from a school and we just looked at it and it looks different. Does that happen? The answer is yes. The question is why. So sometimes if there was an adjustment made to the FAFSA, either you went in and made a correction, or let's say you were selected for verification and something changed, that could change that expected family contribution and in turn change the financial aid offer. Or if the school made a change because they got to swap around funds, that's definitely something that's worth calling the financial aid office for. Certainly you're welcome to reach out to us and we can maybe make an educated guess as to why that might have changed. But that's a situation where I would say, I thought this was different. Can we, and when a change like that occurs, the financial aid office is required to notify the student why. So somewhere in an email or a letter, there will be an explanation, but always worth a call in that circumstance. And that's a great question. So thank you for asking that. And then I see another one that says, best for the student to call or parent call. 6 of 1 happen. I tend to land on, this is the student's process. Now, granted, we know you as parents are involved. And in most cases, some students don't have their parents involved. Where the parent is, we recognize that. And I don't think, as long as the school has permission to talk to you, I don't think a financial aid office is going to say, you're the parent, we're not doing anything for you. That said, I do think it's important for the student to take ownership of the process. It's their FAFSA. They've just used some of your information on it. It's their education. They're in the driver's seat with taking their classes and doing all of those things. So I tend to err on the side of, maybe it's a three-way call. Maybe you and your student are on speaker and you're talking, and you're kind of helping the student navigate through the terminology and what you need to know. With the appeals process also, of course, it's generally the parent's income that's been impacted, but I still think the statement, the letter being from the student, and, even saying it's really important that I'm able to go here and I can we relook at this? That the student really be in the driver's seat, but no one's gonna negatively look down on the parent initiating that process. I just tend to think it's always better to put the student in the driver's seat, and that will make them more comfortable with asking in the future if things change or getting comfortable with approaching the financial aid office. Great question.
I always say it's bonus points if the student calls.
I know I always preferred it that way. Because it really makes the onus on them. Okay. Oh, another one just popped in. When students decide not to go to a school that offered them merit, does that mean the aid could be awarded to another student? Maybe. That's a question. And I was going to say, usually schools, both in financial aid and admissions, are generally offering to more people than they think are going to come. So it's always a little bit of a gamble. Because they know that they're going to offer funds, whether that's merit or institutional aid, to a lot of students, knowing that a percentage of them are going to come. So financial aid directors and all that have this this crazy math that they have to do to determine what their limits are and how much do we offer if every person we gave it to accepted, could we do it, that sort of thing. There might be some institutional funds where the money goes back into the pool, essentially, but not a guarantee. But that's a great question. Just thinking about, merit might function a little bit differently, but there's usually a budgetary thing that they've kind of overspent before, because they know that not every student that they've made an offer to is going to accept. So that's just a little inside scoop for you.
When I worked in aid, we would have all different types of pots of money. I like to say we had all these little pots of money to give out. And one of them was endowed scholarships, where people would donate money to the school and say, I want you to give this money to a redheaded kid from Aroostook County. And I use that because I am a redheaded kid from Aroostook County. And that redheaded kid maybe decided not to come to my school, and now I got to find another one. So sometimes, I mean, that's why it's always great to communicate with the school that you are looking for more aid, because merit money is, I wouldn't say is ever given to another student, but like that endowed scholarship might be. So it's always good. I kept a list in my office of students that I knew were struggling. So if there was some money that came up, that I would know who really needed some help. Not
And
everyone does that, but
sometimes, I know I did that. And sometimes financial aid offices have, like, I don't want to say secret, but pools of money that they're not going to put on the website that they have available. That's kind of designed for this purpose. So if you do the math and your bottom line is, I'm going to throw a number out there, $4,000, and you go, oh, I think we could do three. Like, if we could just get another $1,000 to, like, we'd be fine. Have that conversation with the financial aid office. Say, look, we did this math. We really want to make this work. Is there anything you can do? And they might say, okay, well, what about this? Or, we have this other pool of money set aside for this kind of conversation. Or a waiting list for something like Nikki, I kept a list of, like, so if I knew something opened up, I'm like, where's my little Santa Claus list? And I would give out more money, right? That's what I used to call it. So I think always worth having those conversations. It can't hurt to ask. The worst they're going to say is no. I will say, if you are in a situation where you did the FAFSA, your EFC is 0, so you've got the maximum Pell, state of Maine grant, you've pretty much received the most financial aid you can. The income appeal that I talked about at the end, probably not going to do a lot for you, because that's kind of designed to recalculate the figures that went on to the FAFSA, specifically AGI income related things. A 0 is a 0 as far as the FAFSA is concerned, at least for now. We know some changes are coming, right, with eligibility. That said, it doesn't mean you can't ask for more. It doesn't mean you can't say, we were impacted by this. We know we have the most, like, federal and state financial aid available, but we really, like, had to live off our savings during the pandemic because so-and-so lost a job and now we can't afford this. Always ask. Make friends with the financial aid office. Communicate to them in writing. The worst they're going to say is no, and then you kind of re-examine the options. But you might be surprised that they have the ability to help you in some way. Maybe they can increase the work study a little bit, because there are a lot of students who get offered that who don't use that. And sometimes they might be able to work through, I know we always had a work study waiting list too. So after we reconciled with, like, who was earning and who wasn't, we could go through and boost or add work study to some people's accounts. So always worth asking. Great group of questions tonight.
super. Just one more thing here. I've got any help with parents getting loans, or is that another session? I would think that would be more of a one-on-one meeting. There are 3 types of educational loans. Just the loan that was on your financial aid offer. We always want students to borrow that first because it's the cheapest and there's some benefits to it. But then if you need money on top of that, there's the parent loan and private loans. And the parent loan's in the parent's name, which is credit-based. The private loan is through a bank in the student's name. That's credit-based as well, so they're gonna need a cosigner. So I always like to see how much you need to borrow, then try to talk about, who do you want the borrower to be? What's the credit rating? Because the parent loan is easier to get, but the private loans might have a better interest rate, but it changes all the time. So I think at the time you go to borrow, which wouldn't be until, I would say, at least this summer, once you get that bill and then see how much you owe, then we would talk about what's the interest rate right now, who do you want the borrower to be, what's the credit situation, does the parent have good credit or no? Yeah, we would be happy to work that out with you.
Yeah, and we do have that conversation at one-on-one. I did put a link in the chat for a tool that we've created called the loanforme.com, which kind of incorporates some understanding around private loan borrowing and what that might look like, and also offers a way for you to side-by-side compare Maine-based banks and lenders, which is really hard to say 5 times fast. but it's real banks and lending institutions with real humans that you can contact, which I tend to like. And what's great about this tool is it will allow you to kind of do a deep dive into what borrowing looks like and what to expect and what to ask, fixed versus variable, repayment terms, all of that. So you could spend some time reading through this just to kind of get a sense of what the options are. But certainly reach out to us and we can navigate kind of what paying that bill looks like. And it might be a piecemeal approach. It might be, somebody borrows, the student and parent, parent co-signs on a $3,000 loan, and then you've got, $1,000 in savings, and then you do a payment plan for the rest of it. Usually it's kind of a little by little here, little there kind of approach. But we are absolutely willing to walk you through what those options are. So feel free to reach out. Good questions. I love it.
Super good. And then one more, does anyone ever appeal getting in-state tuition? Like if the student's looking to go out of the state and the tuition rate is sometimes really high. I'm always up for a conversation about should we appeal. Never hurts to say, hey, can I get in-state tuition? Because there are some programs like the NEBI tuition break program, where if your major is not offered in Maine and you want to go to another New England school that participates in the NEBI tuition program. Maria, I couldn't find that website. Would you mind looking for that?
I can get it. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is just a New England said, hey, if you don't have it in your state, we'll give you in-state tuition at our school. So there is that option, but also like there's some other programs in Maine where if a veteran, an active duty veteran comes to a Maine school, they can, like a state of Maine school, they can qualify for in-state tuition because of that. So I definitely would call the school and say, hey, is this even possible to get in-state tuition? And if so, how? Maria just put a link in the chat to the NEBI tuition. Thanks for that. Couldn't find it off the top of my head. I can never remember how to spell NEBI. It's the New England.
I just Googled tuition break, and thankfully I had recently been there and it popped up.
Nice. Great questions, guys.
Yeah, this has been fantastic for us to help you, and we hope useful to you. Again, our sessions are free, so come join us for a workshop. That'll be a one-on-one. Bring a calculator, bring a worksheet. We'll get it done. But certainly you can reach out to us if a different night works better. Keep in mind, May 1st is usually like signing day or decision day. So between now and May 1st, is when this math is happening in conjunction with applying for the scholarships and all of that and building the appeals process. So we're kind of in the stretch right now, but we're here to help you navigate the process. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great night, all. Oh, Tippy has decided to make an appearance.
Tippy!
Waited until the end, though.
Right?
At least this time. Thank you, Nikki.
You're welcome.